Welcome to part 2 of the Res Forum's 2030 Vision Study. Today, we'll discuss the key changes shaping the workforce, remote work, leadership, culture, and generational mobility, and hear how different generations are adapting. Let's jump into the conversation.
When I think about the global mobility community with whom we had this conversation, what was clear right throughout the conversation was that, at least initially in the debate, it was the remote work topic that mobility professionals flowed to as probably their comfort topic. The one with which they're most comfortable debating, discussing pros and cons before we got into some of the more philosophical debates about the gig economy and sustainable global careers.
So I think this is what was really interesting about this study is you have the three themes. I think you really hit the nail on the head here, David. Is that we saw a lot of the standout comments really put a highlight on the generations that are all in the workforce now and how they're reacting to these different forces in the Vision 2030 study. Is that they have the different perspectives on how they're going to be interacting in this new workforce and how mobility is going to interact with them and either support them or present new challenges, right? Soren, you kind of put a spotlight on it as well, is they're going to struggle. I think the early career folks are going to struggle with how they're going to be in the office, but they're also going to be the ones that are going to have the greatest opportunities if they are the most engaged when you get them into the office. Are they going to be the ones that are going to thrive the most if they are supported with perhaps more business travel or shorter term assignments because they might not want to be on the long term assignments?
I don't know. I think, to be honest, most people with the right incentives would have the appetite for long-term assignments. Certainly if they're structured the way they were back in the oil and gas and farmer days, then I would also
Well,
find it very difficult to.
we call those
Well,
the salad days.
well, indeed. you know, I personally, I was on an assignment many years ago, and it is an amazing opportunity for anyone to get this. My wife and child stayed at home at the time because I decided I didn't want to necessarily go on assignment with the family because I also knew the effects. So I went by myself and commuted back, and it was a bit of a almost like a distributed assignment, really. So it was like a long term assignment, but broken into three parts. So I went there for 6 months, but did another 12-month stint where I was still looking after the same portfolio in the US. And that worked really well. And I think that's something that also would be attractive to many people, dual careers, from a family perspective. So you don't have the disruption to the children or to the family unit, people having to leave their jobs, etc., which is a big concern for many people, particularly in today's job market. So if you can structure it in a way, then you can still get the opportunities to have the international exposure, but structured in a way that where you can do less over a longer period of time. That also would make it cheaper and get many more people involved as well. I know Bayer are doing a great job at these distributed assignments where you have almost virtual assignments where you go on a business trip multiple times, but retain a role maybe for a couple of years of overseeing a project or whatever it might be in a different country. So you can sort of mix and match it.
That's a really interesting point, actually, Soren. I was talking to a German company just last week, and they're actually implementing a formalized policy now for virtual assignments. They want to become a more geocentric organization. They want to develop cross-cultural fluency and competency across their employee base, but they're also struggling with the fact that people are maybe a little bit kind of intrinsically less mobile in this day and age. I spoke to two or three CHROs on this topic. One of them gave three reasons for why they really struggle to get people moving. One was nationalism and fear of moving abroad and a backlash, a kind of anti-immigrant backlash. The other one was the comfort blanket of inherited wealth. And if you're going to inherit large amounts of wealth at a certain point, then you're not going to want to move too far from home. And then, of course, I think you mentioned it before, so and there's the dual income challenge as well, which is, go back 10 or 20 years and people relied on one income. One partner might work and the other partner might be a stay-at-home parent. But those days are largely gone in many parts of the world, and households rely on two incomes. Likewise, somebody actually said, another CHRO said that they struggle. It's almost a generational thing. The older generation are more mobile, but younger generations are inherently less mobile, and it's a real pain point for them when they have quite a young workforce, and they need to get those people moving, learning the business, understanding the kind of the value chain of their global business model. And then I think another sticking point was family, family, family. You mentioned it, Soren, about disruption to family. And when we looked at the reasons, the blockers, the reasons for declining an assignment, literally family, 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 family issues, family concerns, kid concerns, partner concerns. So I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why mobility teams are kind of jumping on this topic as a way, particularly with AI, to actually develop an offering, an EVP, that they feel that they can make a difference there. Because if remote work is all going to be automated and compliance requirements are going to be automated and gig economy may or may not sit with another team, then where's the area for mobility to have the most impact? It's in developing what looks like a sustainable global careers offering for their employer.
There's definitely something there. I think there's a stratification of global mobility team. So working for hyper scale up tech companies, the mobility experience, as in from the employee perspective, as in me, the mobility leader, is very different to being in oil and gas or pharma, where you in those companies they are sort of like, oh, maybe what should we do now? Let's think 3 years ahead. Whereas here there's few hands to the pump, and basically it's all action all the time. So therefore, we are expected to be involved in a wide variety of things that would never hit a normal mobility team's table at all. So, eh, permanent transfers, internal mobility within countries, domestic moves, like you name it. As long as as long as no one else knows how to do it, then it lands on our table. So, therefore, I think, and this is also when you are delivering, same for the Eastern companies like I talked about before, like they don't have the same view on ESG or anything else because they are still growing and they're still wanting to achieve something magnificent. Whereas the older sort of industry companies they've had their peak and they're sort of plateauing or declining. So therefore, it's a very different type of mobility that you have to do, finding oil in Angola or whatever else. We know how to do that. We know what the policies are, everything else. Whereas creating the most popular app in the world and distributing it to the entire world is something no one has ever done before. So, so therefore, and we can't just say, oh, well, we should think about that flight over there because of oh, well, there's an issue with sustainability. No, we need to get it done. If you need to do that, just get it done. So therefore, it's very much a get it done culture. So therefore, there's little bandwidth and appetite to introduce new things into it. Plenty of remote work, both permanent and temporary, but that's more necessity as opposed to a strategic deployment of talent. Some companies have that. You have Atlassian, one of the biggest distributed workforce company in the world, where everyone's remote. That's a very different model. They've taken a strategic decision. Whereas if we are saying we're using an EOR and people can work remotely from, I don't know, South Africa, that's because we need someone in South Africa yesterday. And we'll deal with the consequences after we made it happen. And then we look at the differentiation between industries and whether the industry is still growing or whether it's plateaued or declining.
I agree. They're all at different levels of maturity, right? And they're pivoting with their leadership, what their goals are as their products and their markets change. So going back to the survey a little bit, where do we see the themes heading in the next year? Where are people going to be accessing their mobile talent? In my fields, we see clients and organizations, they're constantly looking at benchmarking to see if their programs are right-sized or not. But really, are they looking at talent within their own industries? Or is it more pragmatic for them to be looking at people and talent that are more open to mobility, more so than just a certain skill set? Or is there a certain balance? I mean, when we look at the gig economy, sustainable careers, because you mentioned earlier, you're looking, you have people who right now may not be open to mobility, but in 5 years, they might be in a different period in their lives
Yeah.
that are, you're looking at a different set of benefits.
Well, maybe this is also where we have where we will actually finally see what's been built since I've been in mobility is, the holy grail, talent mobility. We all want to solve this. We've always wanted to solve this with the use of vendors. Anyone had wanted to pitch in with this, and no one has, to my mind, been able to solve this. But I think truly that with AI, and if you're able to actually target the data in the correct way, this is maybe where we'll be able to find talent in the specific way to be able to deploy them. And that's both from a actual from a retention internally, so people could maybe complete a database with a range of skills that you could use AI to interrogate to actually find the appropriate skills and decide to move to a different location. And you could do the same thing with hiring platforms like LinkedIn and others, where you could actually mine the data for this particular talent. So not just the skills, but also the desire to move, and also not just desire, but I think there's also a suitability for moves as well. So one of the things that we did in oil and gas was that people actually underwent psychological evaluations. The family had interviews. There's a lot of money back then. And it was the heyday of oil and gas. No expense spared. Someone come to your house for 5 days and interview your family before you're going on assignment to make sure that they were right psychologically to actually undertake this, which is the right way to do it. But no one does that anymore because it's too expensive. But, you have a lot of failed assignments. We had very few failed assignments because we did this due diligence. And if you did the same, looking at large data sets and actually mining it properly and using AI, then we could actually possibly be able to break the code as to unlock talent mobility, to be able to find the right talent for mobile assignments, either be that proper assignments or permanent transfers or anything else. And we can see people's resilience for living in a different country or being, as adventurous as David, for instance, and living in 5 or 6 different countries and thriving in those countries as opposed to just sort of getting by, which you see many expats actually hating it and they're only there for the money, which is not really a good talent strategy in terms of, delivery.
I think, what was really interesting was that it's in Singapore and in Malaga in Spain and Helsinki, there was a lot of conversation around these topics. I suppose that sort of nexus between the gig economy, remote work, and sustainable global careers. A lot of the people there felt that there was the opportunity to elevate global mobility almost into a global workforce planning function. I know one company in Northern Europe who is already trying to kind of bite off the legal agreements for gig workers as part of their functional remit. And I know a couple of there was a tech firm that we spoke to. There's an engineering firm in the UK and a US tech firm that, they said, oh, well, the gig worker thing is not really for us. It's not a topic. But when you drilled into the detail, it turns out a third of their respective workforces are actually gig workers and contractors. And I don't just mean in kind of, seasonal staff or whatever it might be, but it's expert-based roles, skilled staff, rotating engineers and things like that. There's also a regional element to this. There was a German automotive company that said that they felt, particularly on the gig economy, that they saw that in Europe, they can't see the gig economy emerging as a primary employment conduit because of labour legislation, labour leasing rules, labour protections. In APAC and the Americas, particularly Latin America and Canada, they felt that there was some prospect of the gig economy actually moving to a degree being implemented, but very highly likely that the US would go down this path of continuing to use and to really leverage gig workers. But of course, that comes along with risks and opportunities, I think. When you've got external workforce, you've got risks of IP ownership. Who owns the IP of the work that you do? There's the risk of accidentally becoming an employee with everything that means. There's duty of care and labour protection differences. Soren, you already mentioned EOR and compliance topics. But where I do think there's a really interesting opportunity is, for example, you mentioned it before, Jen, it creates almost a larger market for accessing the skills that you need in a particular location for a time period on a particular topic. And therefore, it comes back to, again, that workforce planning, global workforce management as an opportunity for GM.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the opportunities for organizations and perhaps some of the risks. I mean, did you see any of this come out in the study itself and any variances amongst either industries? I mean, you talked a little bit about the regions themselves, David, which I think is fascinating that this study really uncovered because we see this, I see this all the time in our work as well, is just the breadth and the range of policies and programs that have emerged over the past several years. So I'm already seeing that in the evidence in companies' programs nowadays. But did you see this in any of the comments, David or Soren?
I think that's a really nice point. You mentioned the word policy, Jen, and one comment that we got was, think about your program, and an outcome designed program beats a policy led program. Thinking about how do you find success? What is it exactly that you're trying to achieve? And then working back from that. Another organization was thinking, well, if you've got a remote workforce, it makes our work and our life easier. I think it was a Baltics-based company that said increasingly they're leveraging that distributed workforce, finding skills in country. It's lower cost. We don't necessarily have to do all the relocations. It's faster integration, and it creates a program of stronger diversity as well. There's all those classic, you mentioned risks. There's those classic risks of remote work, which we all know about. There's PE, there's the immigration and the right to work topic. And there was quite a institutional paranoia from some segments of industry around kind of data, IP address and cyber risk. If you've got remote workers in particular or virtual workers. And then there's the practicality. And I think this is where AI will really, really help, which is, tracking processes, tracking rights to work, tracking eligibility, tracking durations, and tracking confirmation of return from temporary remote work as well. And that was something that was flagged by a number of people throughout the conversations we had to create the right framework and the right automations to actually manage such a complex and diverse workforce.